Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 18 of our reading of Rod Serling's Twilight Zone. 26 Unforgettable Explorations is the Realm of the Supernatural, adapted by Walter B. Gibson, and we're going to go over the copyright information, which should be on the screen right now. It clearly says that Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone is copyright 1963 by Cayuga Productions, Incorporated, and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited is copyright 1964 by Cayuga Productions, Incorporated, all rights reserved. This 1983 edition is published by Bonanza Books, distributed by Outlet Book Company, Incorporated, a Random House company, and the address is there. This book was previously published as two separate works entitled Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited. It says it's printed and bound in the United States of America, and that's the Library of Congress number. And information if you're interested in that. We've been reading, and we're almost done with the Tiger God. It turned out that Kalma was the one posing as a tiger while he was supposedly buried alive. Anyways, destroying the statues brought the Raja and Shelbar back to their human forms, and now they are about to enter the Diamond Vault with Greylock and Princess Helena, because Bardu was protecting the entrance to the vault, and he didn't realize it. So he truly was an adept, but that's okay. Anyways, it says here, we're going to continue now. Let me make sure this is recording. It is. Okay. Let's see. It says, excuse me. Okay. The Raja walked over and spoke to the old adept, who unlimbered from his lotus position and stepped from the niche the first time that Greylock had seen him do so. Shalbar stepped forward, stooped, and lifted a perfectly fitting slab that was set in the alcove. Below was a stairway leading down beneath the palace. If Kalma had slain Bardu, declared the Raja, he would have found and robbed this secret vault. Fortunately, we ended his career as Bag Zaloom, the Tiger God. Now, I am willing to sell my diamonds to the world. They went down into the vault, and while Greylock walked about dazzled in the magnificence of the wonderful diamonds, the Raja showed him his Highness exclaimed the reason for his sudden decision. From the way things are in Delhi, declared the Raja, India will someday be nationalized. They want people to spin cotton, not to hunt tigers. So, I intend to share my wealth with my subjects here in Bildapur. They can have the best of spinning wheels, diamond-studded if they want, with enough money to buy a few rifles for tiger hunting too. This was a final smile. Then with a final smile, the Raja added, "And you, Mr. Greylock, will be my sole worldwide agent for the disposal of all these diamonds. Today you won't find Bildapur on any map of India, for it was one of the earliest native states to be absorbed and forgotten. But you may find Greylock in his little jeweler shop on New York's East End. He is a kindly old man who will gladly show you some matchless diamonds from a place called Bildapur. Also, if you ask him, he will tell you a story exactly as you have. He will tell you this story exactly as you have read it here." And that will do it for that. But now we are moving on to another story. It is called The Avenging Ghost. All that could be seen of Pleasant Farm was a bleak black ruin as Hank Dawson swung his ancient car along the road that skirted Bald Eagle Mountain. A fine old farmhouse it had been, overly large perhaps, and rather spraddled out as Hank remembered it, but well built in good northern New England tradition, with granite foundations and solid stone chimneys. Those were all that now remained. It was just about 4 months ago that the fire had occurred. On one of those stormy spring nights, when the lightning flashed above the mountain peaks, and the thunder came rolling in with the wild winds that swept down through the notches. Then, in the wake of all that fury, a mammoth beacon had flared against the midnight sky, roused the quiet town of Hilldale, and sending its antique fire equipment to a scene where it arrived too late to do any good. For Pleasant Farm, situated on a fertile shelf, partway up the mountain slope, was a difficult place to reach, and the water supply had been inadequate to cope with such a holocaust. Fanned by the heavy winds, the flames had carried to the high burn, so that too was gone, except for its old foundation. Both farmhouse and barn had been. Oh, yeah, the barn burned too, I guess. Carried to the huge barn, and it too had. Okay, it was gone. Both farmhouse and barn had been empty at the time. Pete Ryerly, who owned the place, had been raising cattle with a partner from Boston, Lloyd Proctor, but they had sold out their livestock some time before and were turning the farm into an antique shop. That too had gone up in smoke, but Pete Ryerly was still trying to collect insurance, which should please Lloyd Proctor, who had put up all the money. Hank Dawson, as deputy sheriff, heard of all such things. Today, Hank had also heard from Janet Ryerly, Pete's wife, who was now living in the Stony Brook cottage down the slope from the burned farm. Her note had said that she wanted to talk to Hank right soon. So toward sundown, he had decided to mosey out on Bold Eagle Way. Now, the wind was rising as the darkness settled, so instead of driving round the back of the cottage, Hank stopped on the road and walked up the path that formed a shortcut. Ooh, shortcut. There were dim lights in the squatty cottage, making it all the more grotesque against the somber sky. Hank could scarcely see the outline of a storage shed behind it because of shrouding evergreens that loomed from the hillside. Those trees were weaving in the rising wind, each with a motion of its own, turning them into a row of ghostly dancers black against the sky. Hank paused and shouted above the wind, "Hey there, Janet!" The answer was a deep, savage barking of a dog. That would be Duke. The Great Dane Lloyd Proctor had kept at Pleasant Farm until he went on a trip to buy antiques. Then he had put Duke in a kennel over in New Windsor. A good idea, Janet bringing the big dog back here as protection. Hank called again, the door opened, and he saw Janet waving with a hand and gripping Duke's collar with the other. As Hank entered, Duke delivered a few growls, which Janet punctuated with the order, "Quiet now," and the big dog subsided. Janet, a woman in her late 20s, was small but by no means frail, as her handling of Duke proved. Her face showed the healthy glow of outdoor life, and the big brown eyes above the cute stub nose were quite as expressive as her well-formed lips. Those lips were smiling when she said, "You must be psychic, Hank." "Psychic?" Hank frowned, puzzled. "What's that?" "It means you can read thoughts at a distance. Telepathy, they call it. I wanted to ask you to come up here and stay a few hours on the first windy night, but I didn't put that in my note. Then an hour ago the wind started up, and who arrives but good old Hank Dawson, the man I wanted to see. Come to think of it, I just began to see the wind stir kinda heavy when I decided to swing over here. Tell me, what's the trouble?" "Since you are psychic, Hank, have you ever seen a ghost?" "Not for sure, but I don't disallow that some folks may have." "You may be seeing one tonight. Wait while I make some coffee. If Duke acts up, you'll know the ghost is around. Duke always hears it first." Well, the coffee perked. Hank put a log on the fire and began to note a variety of sounds. He heard the wind roar down the chimney. He noted a low moan from a corner, but Janet laughed at that, saying it was just a tree bough scraping the roof. Then Hank brought up a subject that was worrying him. Tell me about Lloyd Proctor. How did he become Pete's partner? That's the old story, returned Janet wearily. Pete tells people his big ideas and finds someone to back them. Things go fine until the money runs out. Then Pete blames them, and they blame him. You know how Pete brags and fools people. He promised me a wonderful home if I married him. Now look at it. You mean Pleasant Farm? What else? He couldn't keep it going until somebody put up money to help. Then it burned down. Then it burned out. And we're down to this little cottage. Janet mused briefly. Then felt less critical regarding Pete. Maybe Pete's ideas weren't too good, Janet went on, but his backers weren't so good either. They all pulled out, except Lloyd Proctor. You mean that Proctor was better than the rest? For a while, Lloyd put up all the money to improve the farm and buy the livestock. He gave Pete cash in advance to pay the hired help and meet bills as fast as they came in. Then why didn't things work out? Because they went at it too big. Lloyd kept taking long trips out west, buying cattle faster than Pete could sell those we were raising here, so Pete had to take on more men to run the place and buy more equipment. That made the expenses climb still bigger than the returns, so they closed out. I see. Now, what about the antique business? They planned that as an in-between business, a stopgap, Pete called it. Lloyd went around buying antiques and shipping them into the farmhouse until the barn could be made into a shop. Then the fire killed that. And where was Pete at the time? Courting around the farm, planning the changeover until Lloyd wanted him to go to Florida and take options on a lot of land down there. So Pete was away too, and I was visiting friends in New York that stormy night. And where are they both right now? Pete is down in Florida, clinching the land deal while Lloyd is out lining up salesmen in different territories. Lloyd mails in checks enough to cover expenses here, so I'm just making time until Pete gets back. Janet had poured the coffee, and they were sipping it when the wind rose in a wild outburst, rattling the windows until the cottage itself seemed to shake. Then the fierce howl dwindled to a strange plaintive wail that brought an echoing whine from Duke. As the wind rose again, so did the dog's tone, as though Duke wanted to howl in accompaniment. From far off in the night came a long, sobbing note. It was more than the wind alone. For Hank Dawson, though well acquainted with the storms of the region, he never heard such a sound before. It was a call so distant that it might have come from another world, a chilling eldritch wail that left spine-tingling shivers in its wake. Duke was not only pricking up his ears, his hairs were bristling. His back arched, and he was tensing every muscle. He whimpered. His whimpers showed a mingling of fear and challenge. With it, he must have recognized the call, for he came to his feet and stalked towards the door as though drawn there against his will. Then, under some frantic urge, the dog began to paw the door. Hank Dawson had laid aside his coffee cup and was gripping both arms of his chair. Hank's eyes were fixed as Duke's. Hank's eyes were as fixed as Duke's, and he strained his ears, hoping to catch a repetition of the distant call. Janet stepped over to the door, took a hold of Duke's collar, and turned to Hank. "That's the sound I spoke about," she said. "I told you that Duke would be the first to hear it, so come along." There was a grim ring to the girl's tone. "And Duke and I will show you what happens next." They emerged into the night where the wind was already reaching a half gale fury, a frequent occurrence during those sudden mountain storms. There was moonlight now, but it was flickery because of the scudding clouds. Hank could no longer hear the odd sob in the beat and tumult of the wind. But the cry must have reached a supersonic pitch that was still audible to Duke, for the dog tried to tug free and dash around the corner of the cottage. Janet gave Duke that much leeway, then managed to restrain him a short way past the corner. The dog could still hear the strange call, however, for he was more eager to go than ever. With her free hand, Janet pointed to the white outline of the closed storage shed. "That's where the call comes from," she shouted above the tumult of the storm. "That's where Duke always tries to go." Why don't you let him?" returned Hank. "Not yet. You'll see why if you watch the shed door." They were moving slowly toward the shed due to Duke's incessant tugs. Then, as though accentuated by their approach, the door to the shed swung wide open. Duke reared, and his tone became a half yelp, half growl, the latter for Janet's benefit, since she alone was holding him back. The dog was frantic now to reach the door where the ghostly manifestation was in progress. Ghostly it was, in more than one way. Hardly had the door opened before it started to close again, then hesitated and wavered at the halfway mark. The wind lulled, and Hank muttered low enough for Janet to hear. "Tricky the way the wind is acting." "It isn't just the wind," Janet's tone, though hoarse, was filled with awe. It always acts the same, Hank, as if it were beckoning you on. And there is something that moves in from the night, something that you can't quite see, yet you can almost feel." Hank was sensing it now, very sharply. He was sure that he saw a vague human form take shape at the edge of the crazily swinging door, as though to hold it at the halfway mark. Then Hank realized that the outline could have been caused by the shadow of the waving tree bough that filtered the uncertain moonlight just above the shed. Suddenly, grotesquely, the form became a tall, upright oblong, which Hank took to be simply the open doorway, as represented by the black interior of the shed. By now, Hank had his flashlight out and was focusing it on the doorway, hoping to spot someone there, but at more than a 50-foot radius, the beam gave only a glimpse of the shed's interior. And before Hank could get closer, the door shut with an emphatic slam, as though someone inside was trying to avoid the light. Right then, Duke took over. He was literally loping for the shed, and although Janet was hanging on and hobbling his gait, the dog was dragging her with him as she gasped excitedly to Hank. "Duke always does this when the door slams. He must see something go inside, because just now I saw it myself, like an arm." Hank had seen it too, a shoulder, arm, and hand slicking in through the closing crack of the door, ahead of its sudden slam. That too could be an illusion, for the windswept clouds were thickening, changing the moonlight into kaleidoscopic patches of black and gray. But Hank wasn't for holding Duke back. Quite the contrary. The deputy sheriff dashed forward, pulling his revolver from his holster, and shouted, "Let the dog go." Janet released Duke, and he launched himself like a canine thunderbolt, reaching the shed in gigantic leaps, passing Hank on the way, Janet coming up behind them, shouting, "Watch the door, Hank, watch the door." Timed to the words, the door flipped open as of its own accord, and Duke bolted through, only to have the door slam again, as though some ghostly hand had pulled it shut. Hank arrived there grabbing the handle and yanked hard, only to find that the latch was stuck. A few quick tries and the door came flying open, almost sprawling Hank ahead of it. Hank found his footing and surged angrily into the shed, with Janet now right behind him. With a wave of his gun and a sweep of his flashlight, Hank bawled, "Whoever you are, stay where you are. Put up your hands and keep them up in the name of the law." That order was wasted. Hank's flashlight, covering the interior of the shed, showed only a storage room, a dozen feet square and about 8 in height, containing a variety of implements such as a lawnmower, wheelbarrow, garden hose, and stacks of boxes filled with household goods, plus an array of old bottles. There wasn't a space in which even a midget could have hidden, but to the right Hank saw a wooden partition with another door in its center. There, Duke was on his hind legs, clawing, whining, half barking as he tried to get through. As Hank started in that direction, the door suddenly swung open, coming almost at him. Hank thought momentarily that Duke had pawed it open, for the dog was bounding through and the door was swinging shut behind him. But the outside wind still howled, and Hank could feel its draft behind him. So he took it that suction had caused the door's action. At any rate, it didn't slam tight shut. Instead, it bounced partly open, and Hank grabbed it on the rebound, resting it wide so that he could shoulder through. Hank stood there with his gun and flashlight in a narrow, low-roofed extension of the storage room, which was nothing more than a small workshop with a simple bench. Duke was in there with him, and the dog was barking heavily now, apparently as frustrated as Hank at finding no one there. Not only was the workshop as empty as the storage room, it was scarcely large enough to accommodate Hank and Duke together the way they barged about it. At the far end, however, there was another door, which apparently opened outside. Hank tried to open it while Duke barked encouragement, but the door wouldn't budge. By then, Janet arrived, took hold of Duke's collar, and quieted him, while Hank was finding out that the door was bolted on the inside. "You can't open that," Janet told Hank. "The door doesn't even give when you try it, so I think it's nailed shut as well as bolted." Hank agreed, but Duke reverted to his plaintive whine and kept scratching at the door, finally trying the hinge side and giving some appealing barks. "No use, Duke," said Hank, inspecting the hinges with his flashlight. "They are fixed to stay." Then to Janet, Hank added, "Listen to the way the wind rattles the loose boards in the shed." But it isn't the wind, Hank," exclaimed Jane. "It's Duke." Janet was right. Duke's probing paw was rattling a loose board beside the door. Hank tried to pry it free with his fingers, then used an old chisel from the workbench. The board snapped inward, bringing 3 more that formed a door in the wall, but it revealed only a shallow space in the wall. "I thought you'd found a secret door leading outside," declared Janet. "That would account for the crazy goings-on around here, but it's only a tool closet." The closet's contents consisted of a heavy-headed hammer streaked with rust, a garden spade, a pair of new work shoes caked with long-dried mud, and a pair of dirt-stained overalls hanging from a nail. Duke sniffed, gave a few sharp barks, then resumed his whines at the bolted door. Hank asked, "Whom do these belong to?" "Probably to one of the men working up at the farm," replied Janet, "or else to Lloyd Proctor. He superintended the fixing up of the cottage." Hank left the articles in the wall closet and jammed it tightly shut. He led the way out through the front door of the shed, with Janet bringing Duke along. They circled the building, and Hank tested the back door from outside, finding it solidly nailed and bolted. Duke tried to help by scratching at the door. Now Duke wants to go in, observed Hank. He's still interested in that tool closet. Judging by the long grass, the back door hadn't been opened in months. They completed the circuit of the shed, and Hank studied the latch on the front door. He found that it joggled slightly when in place, but not enough to open of itself. Hank asked, How did you happen to leave this loose tonight?" "I didn't," replied Janet. "Every day I check it before dark. I suppose someone could sneak up and loosen it, but it has never happened except on windy nights." "So you think the wind loosened it?" "I wouldn't know. The wind was rising again as Janet spoke so strongly that it almost swept them from the shelter of the shed. What do you want to do?" she asked. "Stand around and watch and see what happens?" "No," Hank bawled back. "Let's go into the house." Soon they were in front of the fireplace again, where Duke nestled down, nose between paws, and quietly went to sleep while Janet was heating up the coffee. "You see?" she queried. "Duke knows it won't happen again tonight, even though the wind is getting stronger. He knows, he only hears the odd sound a short while after dark, and it always leads him to the shed and to that little workshop." Okay. We're going to find out more about this at a later time. We still have a long way to go with this one. 23, and we're on. Okay, yeah, we still have a little ways to go. So, anyways, we have been reading from Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, The Avenging Ghost. 26 Unforgettable Explorations in the Realm of the Supernatural. And it is adapted by Walter B. Gibson. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, want to support me in any way, or if you want to join the Discord server, all the information will be in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.